Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the Rent Prep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University Night School. I'm Jeff Pearson. I'm here with my co-host, Stephen White. Hello, Stephen. How are you doing this evening?
Pretty good, Jeff. So we're got an interesting topic here, talking about applicant driver's license. I know for a lot of landlords, it's part of their procedure. You know, they request a copy of the license. And at the very least, I think it's important to at least visually inspect the license, you know, get your eyes on it, look at it. If you can get a copy of it, a scanned copy or a picture on the, you know, on a phone or something like that, if they're comfortable with letting you do that, you know, that's certainly recommended. That way you have a record of it.
Yes.
But so important to look at it for a whole bunch of reasons. So I'll start with the most obvious ones. Number one is the name. You know, how does their name appear on their driver's license, and what does the state know them as? And there's a couple reasons why that's really important. Number one, we deal a lot with people who go by different names. And it's important, you know, especially if you're running a background check on anybody, to try and find out any names that they might go by. So, you know, we use obvious variations of names. Like in your case, Jeff, we would be looking up Jeff, Jeffrey, two different variations of how to spell Jeffrey, just in case you spelled it one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Same with Steve, Steven, you know, those type of things. But if for whatever reason I'm known in certain circles by my middle name or by some other completely different name, which we've seen a lot of people do, it's important to know those additional names. And, you know, that's it. So if the person's filling out the application as, you know, Danny Johnson, but their driver's license says, you know, Alfred Johnson, and he says, well, my friends call me Danny. You know, it's an important thing to know. What is he? You know, what are the possibilities that he could be in a database for? You know,
Right.
he may have used that other name for a landlord on the last lease, and they evicted him, so the eviction is going to be in that name. So it's important to get that verification and any, you know, additional proof that you can get of what their name actually is.
That makes good sense.
Yeah. So another key piece is in certain states, New York is the only state where it's actually law. California is right behind us on making this a law. On a rental application in New York State, you're not allowed to ask for the date of birth.
Really?
And yeah, and so, you know, they see that as too tempting for landlords for it to be age discrimination. So their rule is you have to completely eliminate that from the application. It's not supposed to be on there. You're not supposed to ask them. Oddly enough, there's no issues or rules against asking for a driver's license, which we all know has the date of birth on it. So, you know, for a lot of landlords, they'll call up and say, you know, I don't know how I'm going to be able to run this background check. I don't have their date of birth, which we can run one anyway and find the date of birth. But we always tell them, well, if you're getting a copy of their driver's license, you're covered there anyhow.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and even the newest version of the California Realtors Association rental application now has no space for date of birth. So that's how you know it's coming down the line, and it'll eventually land in California there sooner than later.
Right. Well, it makes sense to a certain extent because, you know, if as a human resource manager, I know one of the questions you can't ask is how old they are, what their date of birth is when you're interviewing a new employee. It would make sense for the same thing, you know, to eliminate age discrimination as much as possible, to not ask for that. But it is kind of an important piece of information. So getting the driver's license is a good starting point.
Yeah, and it's definitely, you know, it's one of those things where now more and more states are not housing records, any kind of records, by social security number. They're doing it by date of birth and name. So if you're missing a large piece of that puzzle, that could be a hindrance for doing a really proper background check. So it's an important piece. I don't want to downplay it and say it's not important. You know, like I said, 9 out of 10 times we could probably find it, but it's always good to, you know, to know and to have that extra assurance. So the driver's license is definitely a key piece of that there.
Right. You know, and you mentioned something else too, the whole idea of what name you go by.
Mhm.
So when you're talking to them, when you first meet them, find out how they introduce themselves.
Right.
Do they use their full official name, Jeffrey, or do they just go by Jeff? Or do they go by Fred? That's a little piece of information that could really help if
Yeah.
you're trying to do a little bit of digging.
For us, it's made the difference on whether or not we find them or not. And, it's having that extra little piece of information. And a lot of times, if we do run into a situation here where we just can't locate somebody, we'll end up calling the landlord. And that's usually our very first question is, do you happen to have a copy of their driver's license? Because that'll usually contain a couple more pieces of information that'll help us unlock the mystery of where is this person and why can't we find them in the database. And that's usually when we are able to start locating them, is with that little bits of additional information. One of the other key pieces in there is the address. Even though it may not be their current address, if they have used it in the DMV records, that will be imprinted in their database records. So they don't even need to currently be living there. But if their driver's license says that they live at 123 Main Street, there is going to be a database record of them being at 123 Main Street, because the DMV, of course, shares their information with database records as well.
Right. So that gives you a starting point.
Exactly. Yeah. So at the very least, that address could be critical, because, if I've seen every situation why somebody would change their names, from marriage to gender transformations. We've seen somebody go from Danny to Danielle or whatever, and we've literally seen it all. And a lot of times that address is the missing link there to be able to say, okay, now I can put this puzzle together and figure out what's happening.
So again, just get a copy of that driver's license and include it with your records.
Exactly. Yeah. It should be, part of your procedure, part of your screening criteria. When you collect that application, that should be a part of it. Let me take a look at your license. And if you don't have time to make a copy, if you don't have time to scan it, if you're on site, if you're showing the apartment and you're there, at the very least, take a look at the information, make sure the names match, check and see if they have the address on the application. If it's not, flip the application over and write the address down on the back, and definitely write down the driver's license number. Those are, again, two very key pieces of information to have. So even if you're not able to make a copy of it, at least take the information off of it and visually inspect it. Make sure that you saw the license, what they're known by officially.
And, in keeping with the laws, if you're in New York, and I would say probably for sure in California and maybe some other states, if you're writing that information down, don't write down the birth date. So it's a different thing. If you take a picture or a photocopy of the driver's license and it includes the birth date, then it is what it is. But if you're going to write it down, don't write down the birth date, because then you're violating the law.
That's a great point. I didn't even think about that, but you're absolutely right. I could see that being a legal trap right there too, for sure. That's a great point, to not write that down, the date of birth. Keep that off the application especially if you're in New York or California.
Yes. Well, keep it off the application, but also keep it out of your notes.
Yeah, exactly.
If you end up having to go to court, they go into discovery. They could ask for all of your notes, and if you have to turn those notes over and you have written down the birth date, then that's a little bit of a problem, or it could be. Just don't do it.
And realistically, for fair housing purposes, as a landlord, really the only thing you need to know is, are they over 18? So that's certainly an appropriate checkbox to have. Most applications do. Are you over 18? Simply because you can't do a background check on somebody under 18.
Right.
So, it's important to know. And in a lot of states, you can't enter a legal contract with somebody under 18. So you want to make sure that, okay, are they legally able to sign the lease? And that's really, again, from a fair housing perspective, that's the only thing that you need to know as a landlord about their age.
Makes sense. Well, great, Stephen. I think we have finished another episode of Night School. I look forward to talking with you tomorrow evening.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University. And remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at thementorimpact.com.